and lots of pictures. So the three keys in this presentation are formative assessment, feedback, and comprehension. All right, so what we have are these three interlocking notions. For just the purposes of making sure we all have a similar vocabulary, let's take a look at formative assessment. This is the work of a theorist named Rick Stiggins, S-T-I-G-G-I-N-S. He started writing really a lot about assessment in the late 80s, early 90s, probably into the early 2000s, actually. And if you've ever heard assessment of learning or assessment as learning, that came from Rick Stiggins. He doesn't always get credit for it anymore because it's actually so widely popular. To talk about this, assessment of learning is the sort of thing that we call summative assessment in education speak. These are the sorts of things that include standardized tests, multiple choice exams at the end of a unit, all of these sorts of things. It could be a final essay that you have to write. It's assessment of learning because we want to know if students have actually grasped what it was they have been taught. And it has a very valuable place. But we also can look at it from another angle. And I think this is the main thing that I would take away from Rick Stiggins' work, is that assessment is not just the test at the end of the unit. It's not just the essay you wrote after you read War and Peace or Moby Dick. So that's assessment of learning. That's summative assessment. Assessment as learning is more about metacognitive thinking. It's about reflection. It's about teaching students to be self-reflective, to be able to say, I'm not getting this and I need to do something about it. Or, I know how I learned this and I can do it again. That's assessment as learning. It will figure into our discussion a little bit today, but mainly I want to focus on assessment for learning. Assessment for learning is easy to remember if you remember for and formative. Formative assessment. This is the assessment that we do every minute we're in the classroom, or every minute we're in an instructional environment of any kind, where we're looking to see, are the students understanding? Are they getting it? Where are their strengths? What are their challenges? That's assessment for learning. And it's the information we gather about how they're doing that. We get it from a variety of sources. We get assessment for learning information from the work they're doing while they're doing it. We get this information from the questions they ask and from their responses to our questions. We get this information from exit slips. We get this information from listening to small groups. That's assessment for learning. It's not necessarily graded, and in fact, probably most of it isn't and shouldn't be. Okay, so this is the important thing to take away from this work. Formative assessment, assessment for learning, provides information. It provides information that can be used by the teacher to improve learning outcomes. So let's talk about the second key, and that's feedback. I think you can see the teacher holding the who card in the middle. So if not, let me know. Some years ago, I did some work on what feedback is and came up with a typology, which I can share with you. If you're interested, just send me an email and I'll share my email at the end of the session tonight for those of you who do not have it. And so what we have here is some of the traits, some of the characteristics of feedback. This is not all, but these are the ones that I think are really important. Feedback needs to be helpful. A student needs to be able to take that information and feel like they have been assisted, they have been helped. It also needs to be kind. It's really easy to take out the old red pen, and even though we don't use red pens much anymore, we're going to do, we take out colored fonts and all sorts of things, and it becomes really easy to come up with feedback that is unkind, critical feedback that just marks out what is wrong and not what is right. It marks out, it shows students how they have failed, but it does not show them how they have succeeded. It does not show them how they can move forward. Feedback needs to be kind. It needs to be respectful of learners. And I think any other kind is inviting students to ignore it. Actually, I think that students who, at any level, actually, who feel like the assessment information, the feedback information is coming from a place of of being unkind criticism, is not likely to use that feedback, or they're more likely to do so grudgingly, if anything. So kindness is a big deal in feedback to me. It needs to be useful. Students need to be able to actually do something with the feedback that is provided. They can move forward in some direction. They can keep their eye on their goal. They can see how they're going to get there, what the next steps are. It needs to be useful in that it sometimes suggests possibilities that the student had not thought of. Not right or wrong, just different. There are many, many opportunities this way for making feedback useful. Students need to find it actionable. They heard it, they read it, they absorbed it in some way, and now they're going to put it into action. And this is the problem with grading formative feedback. Once you've attached a grade, then it becomes kind of written in stone. You know, those big blocks, the pyramids in Giza, they're still standing 4,000 something some odd years later. We don't want to write that sort of thing in stone. We want students to be able to act on it and move forward before they start building the pyramid. And finally, of course, it needs to be timely. Feedback, not necessarily while the process is in place, but very often that's where it's most useful. One strategy that I have always found very useful is for providing timely feedback is called praise, prompt, and leave. Now this works really well in the face-to-face classroom. It takes a little work to make it happen in the virtual world where we have found ourselves the last few months. The necessary virtual world rather than the one that we use when we want to, when it's convenient, and for a number of other reasons. Praise, prompt, and leave works like this. Let's say I have a class of 35 eighth graders. I taught eighth graders for a number of years, 20 something years. And so they always want to do this. They always want to put their hand up. As soon as you give an assignment, like, Dr. Woolsey, I don't know what to do. Well, first of all, I'm going to put the directions on the board. I'm going to put a model up there. You can see that. And so you get to work. And if it's not right, I'm going to come around. But I don't want students raising their hand. Instead, what I'm going to do is go around student to student. I'm going to check their work and I'm going to praise some aspect, not good job, but the kind of praise that's useful. I really like the way you've composed this sentence. I really think that this is an interesting insight that you have. I hadn't thought of it. That's the kind of specific praise that is useful. It's feedback, but it's also useful feedback. And it's timely because it's while the students are doing the writing, doing the reading, having a discussion. That's timely feedback. And prompt. Prompt is, you might want to take a look at the spelling of this word. Prompt is, what if you thought about changing the character in the story you were writing in this way? It's just an idea, it's a thought. That's what prompt is, and then you leave. If a student has a question, they can ask while you're there, but you can get around to a whole lot of students very quickly with praise, prompt, and leave. That's the idea of, I believe he's passed away, actually. His name is Fred Jones. His company still moves on. His son is now running the operation, I believe. But it's really useful to be able to give feedback when the product is being completed. If you think about your car, whatever brand it is, and let's say that the manufacturer of your car, I have Ford vehicles back in California. So let's say it's the Ford assembly line. And I know that at the end of the assembly line, my truck, I have a Ford F-150, rolls off the assembly line, and then the inspectors start looking around. That's one option. The other option is that every step of the way, while they're assembling the steering wheel, while they're putting in the transmission, while they're putting in the turn signals, they're always being checked continually. Now, which car do you want? The one that's checked at the end or the one that's checked continuously throughout? What would you do? Which one would you want?
I want the first one where everybody's been checking at every stop so that they can fix any problems.
Yeah, and the problems then are very likely going to be minor problems, right? Instead of great big huge problems that once the whole thing is assembled rolls off the line. Well, literacy learning is a lot like that. It's very much uh, like the idea of let's check throughout the entire process. How are you doing with this? How are you comprehending this material? How is your fluency? Are you working on prosody or just speed? These are the sorts of things that go into the millions of decisions that readers have to make and the millions of decisions that teachers have to make about how to scaffold, how to help their students move forward. So we have three different things that we can talk about, three different sources of information that we can talk about in feedback. First, we can have feedback to ourselves. We do this all the time. If you've ever stopped to think, I could do a better job with this. If you write, you probably have written things, I'm not making the point I want. I'm going to go back and check this. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to do something different, see if I like it better. Self-assessment is really key for self-motivated learners to be able to say, I know what the criteria for success are. I know what a good product looks like. And this is it, or this is almost it if I do something. Okay, so self-assessment is really kind of a very useful thing and might be a good end goal because we don't always have our teachers. We don't always have our knowledgeable peers. We do make use of peers quite often. A big problem with using peers and small groups is this. The feedback is not always very useful. It's not always very kind. It's not always very helpful. Sometimes it's too kind, but not helpful or useful. You've probably heard students say, oh, good job on that, Sally. What can you do with good job? Nothing. You can pat yourself on the back because Sally noticed you did a good job, but you don't really have any idea what the good job was because Sally's being kind, but she's not helpful. She's not being useful. She needs to be able to say, this is what I think about your work. What's your understanding of your comprehension of this article, this novel, this short story, this chapter in the science book, et cetera, is. This is how we might make a better understanding. Or this is what I understood. I see you understood something different. Okay, so peers can be very useful because classrooms are full of peers and small groups, and we use them quite a bit for very good reasons, but we need to find ways to help students to become more proficient in the sorts of feedback they provide, particularly when we're looking online. Of course, a good source of feedback is the teacher. Problem is, one teacher, 35 students. That makes it kind of difficult. So you can use praise, prompt, and leave and this sorts of things. You can do that with groups. You can do this with individual students. But still, there's one you, and there are many, many students. So we can think about necessary frameworks for moving forward, for helping students to think about what it is they're reading. Fortunately, we can use these things online by sharing screens, by having students annotate in Microsoft Word, and so on. This is the work of Chen and Horng, and came out last year. They have tested what they call an annotation software program. I think it might be, I think it's a great idea. I'm not entirely sure, though, that we need to use an entire annotation program when we can actually use Microsoft Word or Google Docs and so on. If you've got a text or a PDF, you've got a text, you can highlight it. You can use different colors for different things. But the key thing here is that students who are learning to comprehend need a framework. They need something that they can use to help them figure out how they're making sense out of that text. And so we're going to use the Chen and Horng framework. This came from Taiwan, by the way. And I am going to put something in the chat room for you. Where did my chat window go? There it is. Okay, this is the framework that they used. So it's in the chat. It takes a minute. There it is. Should be able to be downloaded now. This is their framework, and you can look at the details there. But back at this right here. Okay, so of course I started with the main slide instead of going back where I was. Okay, so here is the framework. First of all, students need to recognize the things that they know. As they're reading, I know this. This is familiar. This is not necessarily new information to me. It might be a framework for something I'm going to read later, but I know this. Otherwise, as students are reading, they have new knowledge. They'll come across things, and the active highlighting, annotating, writing in the margins. Do you know what that's called, by the way? That's called glossing, if you're writing in the margins. Um, Writing things in the margins because something is new and you're making a new connection with new knowledge. We can highlight, we can annotate. We can also use this as a framework for working in peer groups so that students, when they're working with a peer or a small group, can take a look at the text, and they can provide the feedback that students need in order to make sense. You can say something like, well, I didn't know this, but it seems like you already did know that based on those first two categories. We can also mark things we just don't understand. It's worth pointing out for ourselves, remember the idea of self-assessment, that I don't understand this. Maybe there are different ideas, not that the one you had was wrong, but that there are other ways to look at things. There are other points of view, so we can look for different ideas. So we can mark that, we can highlight that, we can talk about that in a small group. We can provide we can realize that we have found additional information for ideas we already had. Then we can also take a look at the idea of things I want to say. You may have heard of a researcher who passed away in the early 2000s. Her name was Louise Rosenblatt, and she talked a lot about the idea of interactive reading, the idea that the reader has to construct understanding rather than just absorb understanding. And that's been looked at in a number of different ways from Paulo Freire onward. But the idea is that the reader needs to be doing something with the text. And this is a scaffold that we can use with students. It's aesthetic reading, or it's effort reading where we're taking something away, or more often, as she said, it's along a continuum. Very often that gets misrepresented. But here's the key here. We want to give students a chance to have a say. I want to say, talk back to the author. You may know the questioning the author framework, the idea that I read this material and here is my response to it. Here's what I want to say. Here's where I want to push back. And then finally, correction. We need to correct students at times. And that's one of the items there. Of course, if something is not right, we need to tell them. So I want to just pause for a minute and ask if there is anything that that you want to ask or say or contribute on that.
I have because sometimes I have kids who, no matter how much feedback I give them, they want me to give the right answers. That they like, I don't understand. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do unless I tell them, okay, this is an example how to do it. But they're so like, they want the answer right away. They don't even try figuring out what to do. So how do you
Yeah.
tackle students who just want you to give them the answer?
One of the things that I think our schools do that's not always helpful is we value right answers, and we value that as it's a systemic level thing, because we give tests and we count points and we give points for everything. So one of the things that I know you do, and that helps to combat this, is you need to try.
Yeah.
What resources do you have? And eventually students, they want to push you for the right answer. But if we can say to students, well, let's see if you can figure out the right answer. And I'm going to come by again in a minute, and I'll pass by your Zoom breakout room, or we'll meet one-on-one, and tell me what you figured out.
I think
we'll talk.
Also works was like, remote teaching, we're done by 1:30, and any students who are having difficulty, I told them to stay back at 1:30. And some students don't want to stay back at 1:30, and miraculously they know how to finish all their work by 1:30. They've done everything. So sometimes we tell them, okay, you stay back or stay back when you're physically in the classroom. I can help you during recess. That they don't want to miss it, and they miracle, like, they figure out a way to do it.
It's like, oh, I just figured it out. Yeah, there needs to be some little incentives like that from time to time too. Um, because yeah, very often students who say, I don't know, I don't get it, tell me the answer. They really do know, but they've learned to be somewhat helpless through the system, or even their parents unintentionally, well-meaningly have said that, I will give you, 25 bucks for a B and 50 bucks for an A, or I will take away your, whatever your popular game. I don't know what the popular games are anymore. Game box, Xbox, whatever they are. Because we put in these extrinsic things. Well, what we really want is for the feedback to be useful, not about the points that are assigned to it. But it's easy to say. It's not so easy to enact in the classroom, I think. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, let's move on then. The other thing on this slide is reader and responder. This is the thing I like about this model, is that when we're working on comprehension, we need to be able to identify either as the provider of feedback or as the self that is assessing our own performance, what kinds of things we're doing while we're reading. And this is a simple enough list that most middle grade students, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 can use this. They can highlight, they can discuss, they can say, well, as I read the article, I knew this, but I didn't know that. And they can use this framework for that. But the other side of that coin is that to encourage discussion, these little sentence starters, these little sentence frames can lead responders to say, I didn't understand, but I see that you had a different take on that. You had a different idea. And so it gives students a framework to be able to say, not just, well, I didn't get it either. They have a framework to be able to come back and say, let's talk about this. I see what you have understood. Here's what I understood. What can we make of this? So I think that what we can do is, moving along, is take a look at some of your ideas. I had intended this as more